Hello, it's David Brooks reading the second half of the first chapter of The Grass Library, which is a memoir and meditation on animal rights. As the weather cooled, we found ourselves increasingly miserable. The wind blasted the tiny harbourside park we'd tried to persuade ourselves Charlie was enjoying, and the relentless damp wormed into our minds. We pleaded our way out of the contract, went back to the mountains and felt we'd taught ourselves a lesson. But still there was restlessness. We didn't know quite what it was until a year later when, sick of the joyful screaming from the daycare centre next door, finding it harder and harder to concentrate on her work and less inclined to return the rubber balls over the fence before Charlie got his teeth into and deflated them, T found online a tiny farm at the edge of town. On health grounds, I'd decided to leave the university if I could. The bad leg I'd had for decades, misdiagnosed, had recently been joined by a bad hand, and seeing a neurologist at last, my powers of denial are impressive. I'd been told that I had MS, the perfect writer's disease I sometimes joke, since the letters also designate manuscript. Perhaps it was time. The university, once a place of thought, freedom and light, had begun to seem a grim factory run by automatons, turning some of my nice carp-like colleagues into piranhas. My last animal metaphor there, if I can help it, see it as a farewell. We called the agent and arranged an inspection. It was love at first sight. 2 sloping acres. At the top, on the cleared part, the old farm, a weatherboard house with a deck, a veranda, and a high kitchen window with sweeping views over what I've come to call the hidden valley. And just below, a 2-room log cabin, empty but for a pot-bellied stove and a yellow out-of-tune piano that I could turn into a library. There were large water tanks, a vegetable garden, a farm shed, to the bottom of the cabin, horseshoes nailed to its uprights, an old chicken coop just below it, and at the bottom, over a rusted, tumbling fence, a 2nd acre of protected bush, hanging swamp, a creek. There was thick bush too all along one side, an untouched property also protected. Huge peppermints and stringy barks, large tree ferns, a pair of black cockatoos flying high overhead. We finished the inspection by driving around to the bottom of the property to get a better look at the swamp. It had been a grey day, but the sun had just broken through. Looking up, I gasped at a broad patch of bright emerald green through the trees. Realised with delight and wonder that it was grass just below the cabin. It seemed too good to be true. We kept looking for the catch, became only the more uncertain when we couldn't find it. We made 3 attempts to climb the lawyer's stairs to sign the contract. After the 2nd, we went to see the farm again. Needing a few minutes to think, I walked down by myself to the rickety middle fence and stared into the trees, listening for I don't know what. Silence, and then, suddenly, a splash, as of some large animal bathing. What was it, a kangaroo, a swamp wallaby? A thrill went through me, it seemed a sign. I turned round, still thinking, and walked up to the cabin, was inspecting the tank there, my mind racing with ideas, when I heard a rasping croak above me. I looked up and saw a huge, glossy white cockatoo staring down from the guttering. He seemed to be asking me what I was waiting for. It's one thing to move onto a little farm, however, and quite another to write about it. This has a different beginning. The precise moment is lost in time, but I think it was while we were in the first inner city rental house, the house we first brought Charlie into, where he'd shivered so much under the dining table that a vegan friend and I agreed over the phone, he was in Western Australia, that animals had had a poor rap in Australian literature, and that perhaps we should write something about this as a way of exposing animal cruelty more generally. A vague project at first, but one which has grown and diversified. I think of this book as a part of it, one channel in its delta. 18 months or so later, maybe sensing that our project was changing direction, this friend asked me to list some of the things I might want to write about. The animal in philosophy, I said, nothing like ambition, and problems about writing about animals in the first place, because already I'd started to encounter these, the way the language itself seems stacked against them, conditioning us subliminally to keep up the cruelty. And then, I don't know, perhaps I was looking at Charlie as I spoke, wondering yet again where his trembling was coming from. And Charlie, outrageous as the idea seemed, I'd like to try to write a biography of Charlie. Almost as soon as I got off the phone, I began to see that last idea as untenable. A biography of a dog? Hadn't Virginia Woolf failed disastrously at just such a project? But there's another part of me that sees such things as challenges. If something seems untenable, then perhaps it's because it suits the status quo to have it seem so, and so is all the more reason one should attempt it. For a year or two, as I got started on some of the other essays, the idea kept coming back. At some point, I began making entries in my notebook, and then, in one of the first weeks on the little farm, sitting at my newly installed desk in the cabin, one of the 5 black cockatoos from the bushland next door staring from the lone peppermint at the southern fence, I started to write and kept it up a little each day, not knowing if anything would come of it. About Charlie, about dusk anxiety, about writing, eventually about the boys, and straying into places I'd never really thought about before. That was November 2012, our second month at the farm. We weren't far into the third. We'd as yet told almost no one about the refuge idea before a friend called to alert us to the plight of 2 sheep, asking if we could possibly give them a home. And within 2 days, I've said T works quickly, they were with us, Jonathan and Henry Lee. It had been 45 years since I'd even touched a sheep. But by the time December was over, they were wandering into the cabin, wandering into the tomato beds, wandering into the sentences, pointing out what a fool I'd been to ever think that I could write about Charlie alone, or write about animals, or writing, or literature without them. Thank you.